I've been researching a video comparing the 1983 video game crash to today, and I want to wait to see what happens, but I also want to talk about the PlayStation Blackout before it happens since I want it to do well despite my issues with it. Before I actually get into it, I'm not here to say physical is better than digital. Both have their pros and cons, but what's important is having both gives people options. Having choices on how or what you buy pushes businesses to sell you the best products or services possible. For example, I'd hate if Walmart were the only grocery store I could buy stuff at because it isn't better than Lidl's, Aldi's, Nam De Mun, or the DeKalb Farmers Market. Sony removing your choice won't make things better, arguably it'll make things worse. I'm sure you've heard Sony won't make any more physical discs for PlayStation titles after 2028. One of the problems with this is, not everyone can play games digitally. Whether it's because of storage space, you live somewhere with terrible internet which makes online gaming / downloading games impossible, or you can't make a PSN account in your region without your account getting banned. A digital-only future may not affect someone who mainly buys digital games on PlayStation, but that doesn't mean everyone can do that. If you want to learn more, there's an article from GameSpot that I highly encourage you to read. To add to this idea, a digital-only future wouldn't be the worst thing if Sony tried to meet people halfway. Like, if Sony invested in better internet infrastructure to help people with bad internet, laid out a clear plan for the public to understand, if people had more control over their digital purchases, or if the PlayStation Store had a better return policy. If you buy a game and download it to the console, you can't return it. I learned this the hard way when my grandfather, who doesn't understand any English, bought Resident Evil Village on my account. Since Sony's so adamant on the digital-only ecosystem, they should make some changes to accommodate players moving forward. Sony claims this decision is just a response to a shift in consumer preferences, yet we don't have a clear picture of everything. I'm no game analyst, so I can't claim to understand the numbers better than other people, but game analyst Matt Piscatello from Circana shows a downward trend in people buying physical games versus digital ones. This coincides with Sony's financial results from 2025, where digital games vastly outsold physical ones. They even clarify in the notes that they aren't lumping in microtransaction, DLC, or expansions to inflate the digital numbers. If anything, add-ons are outselling both, which makes sense because a digital or physical game is only a one-time buy. Also, there are more games released digitally because not everyone has the money to make physical copies. You probably heard of Matt from his Blue Sky post that only 2 PlayStation games sold 10K physical copies during the week of July 11th in the US, and 7 more had sold 100K physical units this year. Again, Matt knows this stuff way better than I do, but I can't even look at it because lots of this data isn't available for the public. I get people worrying about numbers being misrepresented. Like, when you hear Take-Two CEO Strauss Zelnick say 90% of their business comes from digital distribution, on its face that 90% doesn't specify DLC, microtransactions, add-ons, the digital game, or all of the above. Not saying people like Strauss or Matt are maliciously cherry-picking information to push the idea to end physical games. Matt himself was pushing back on the decision if you read through his thread where he explains some of these numbers. The big takeaway on any numbers you might see is that Sony didn't ask people if this is what they wanted. They're just doing what they want while saying they're shifting to meet numbers on the chart. Not to say those numbers don't matter at all, but even if the digital push makes sense based on the data, it's not something that people wanted. Without any other avenues to get physical games after January 2028, there is a worry that Sony could price their games however they want. To quote the Dutch lawsuit or the Fair PlayStation claim, which I highly encourage any Dutch people to check out the Stop Killing Games and their video on the subject, but, quote, "No discs means no second-hand market and no alternative to the PlayStation Store. So from 2028, Sony alone decides what a game costs and even how long you're allowed to use it. This is exactly the harm our Fair PlayStation claim is about. A price can never be fair when the buyer is left with no ownership and no alternative." Now, I'm not saying Sony will abuse their control over the PlayStation Store in an all-digital future. I also don't trust Sony to fairly control prices without checks and balances. Currently, some games are cheaper physically than digitally thanks to the second-hand market. But if that's not bad, Sony's been testing out dynamic pricing, so different people pay different prices for the same version of a game on the PlayStation Store. I don't say this to be rude, but dynamic pricing is a retarded business practice that should have stayed in the depths of LinkedIn hell where it belongs. No need to arbitrarily increase or decrease the price because you've been digging through my personal data and think me googling how to control my anger means mark down Elden Ring. Following their announcement and news that Sony removed over 500 movies and TV shows from their platform, Sony issued a strict media blackout for developers, according to Alana Pierce. This is unfortunate because the decision isn't popular with lots of developers and studios that aren't muzzled. It's not just because many people grew up collecting physical media, but there's been a heavy push in subscription/cloud services. Instead of having some movies and shows, you have Netflix offering you a few things you care about and everything else. Except your digital media can be removed from platforms with no recourse, since you don't own any of it. We're watching the same thing with the PS3 and Vita store shutting down, which were announced on the same day as Sony ending disc production. If not for the secondhand market or piracy, the only way to play these games is via PS Now. PS Now was like a Game Pass, except it doesn't have every PS3, 2, or OG PlayStation game. So if the game isn't available physically, or on the PS3 store, then after the shop shuts down, those games will be lost to the ether. Sony can't get all those games on PS Now because of licensing issues. And although they say your downloads will work for the foreseeable future, it goes back to the ownership issue mentioned in the Dutch lawsuit. If the stuff you buy can be taken away from you, then you don't own it. And because you don't own it, you're at the mercy of the company selling you the license to the product to maintain said license and other bullshit, otherwise it's gone. The PlayStation Blackout from DoesitPlay is cool in theory, but doesn't go hard enough to address the issues I've talked about. It's 1 week of not playing Sony games or buying their products, during a week with no major releases. I get not wanting the blackout to affect the industry at large, but do you know why Sony is doing this now? It's because they believe they can get away with it. That the average person voicing their thoughts online is a performative bum who talks a big game but disappears when it's time to take action. Obviously, I don't mean take action as a violent threat, but Sony knew this decision wouldn't sit well with people, and they're doing it anyway. My first suggestion is that the blackout lasts until the president and his cohorts are on livestream getting rotten fruit thrown at them. Or, more realistically, until Sony reverses their decision, though one of these is much funnier than the other. My second suggestion is to not interact with anything Sony. By that, I mean Sony Pictures, the movies, Sony Electronics, Sony Music, and of course, Sony PlayStation. Instead of getting games from their store, buy used games from secondhand shops like GameStop, since Sony doesn't get a cut of those sales. Play games on other platforms, or PC if you can. But if you really want to play on PlayStation, turn off Wi-Fi to the console, stop updating it, and don't play any PlayStation games that require an online connection. This was something I'd seen online, and I'm no law guy, but it would be cool if other companies could create physical copies of the games outside of Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo. Sadly, because of strict patents, that can't happen, but if something like that did exist and enough people wanted it, you guys should definitely support it the way that you complain about it. Ultimately, I'm not here to say all this will be easy, or that I have all the answers, but that's the funny part about this. You don't have to create another Stop Killing Games, be a rich philanthropist with money to fund these causes, a legal expert to provide counsel to these cases or propose legislation, much less be a huge respected influencer to spread the message further than it would go otherwise. All you have to do is not spend money on a company that actively hates you, send some letters to your local representatives, and tell other people about it. There's a lot I didn't include, and more stories will continue to inflame people. But if there's anything you should take away from this video or any others on the topic, it's to keep paying attention. My biggest fear is that people won't continue to follow this stuff as we get closer to the release of GTA 6, January 2028, or any other events that may come up. Because that's how companies like Sony get away with this stuff. Now they're just trying to run out the clock to the point the McRib comes out, or some other nonsense diverts attention from this. Do your best to stay tuned into these things, otherwise you can't complain when they get worse. That's it for now. I'll see you either on livestream or when I drop something else. Peace out, fleshbags.